This just happened. I've heard it described to be one of the bigger criminal cases in the state of Texas this year. I would agree with that. Around 10 a.m. on April 2nd, 2025, officers were dispatched to a high school stadium in Frisco, Texas. It was a Wednesday and there was a track meet going on. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old. He was a student, he was a junior, and he was involved in both track and football. That Wednesday was just supposed to be another track and field event, but it ended with Austin losing his life and another 17-year-old student getting arrested with first-degree murder. Let's talk about it. Austin Metcalf attended Memorial High School in Frisco. He was a great student and an amazing athlete. People who knew him said that he just became a completely different person when he stepped onto a field. And his goal was to eventually become a college athlete, which he was definitely on track for. At Memorial, he was a linebacker of the football team, and his identical twin brother, Hunter Metcalf, also played as well. The brothers had a very close relationship. They were born only 4 minutes apart from each other, and they did pretty much everything together. Wherever Austin was, you could find Hunter there as well, and vice versa. They were like two peas in a pod. So that day at the track meet, there were tents set up on the bleachers, different tents for different teams from different schools. Austin, Hunter, and their teammates had their respective tent set up for their team. The track meet ends up getting delayed because of a rainstorm that's coming in. It starts raining and all of the students go to their tents to get out of the rain. 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony walks up to Austin's tent. Carmelo's school was the only school from all of the schools that were present that did not have a tent set up. Carmelo was a student at Frisco Centennial High School, so a different school, but he was also there to compete in the track meet. He walked into the tent just 2 minutes before Austin and his friends then walked up, and when Austin saw him, he told him to leave their area and go back to his. According to witnesses, and don't worry, we are going to break this all down in a second, but an altercation breaks down between the two of them, and there's a lot of commotion because when Austin tells Carmelo to leave, the police report states that Carmelo reached into his backpack and said something along the lines of, "Touch me and see what happens." Austin then pushes him, and Carmelo responds by saying something along the lines of, "Now punch me and see what happens." Austin puts his hands on him, and Carmelo pulls out what has been described to be and he stabs Austin once in the chest with it. Then he runs down the bleachers and onto the field. Austin grabs his chest and he collapses, and then there's chaos when the 25 to 30 students start scattering around the bleachers. Everything that I just told you happened within a matter of 4.5 minutes. You can imagine how chaotic and scary and terrible it must have felt. When authorities arrived at the scene, some officers immediately went to where Austin was. Another one went to where Carmelo was. After he ran out and onto the field, he had ran towards one of his coaches. And life-saving measures to save Austin's life began immediately. They began performing CPR, and very soon after, they transported him to a hospital. But despite their best efforts, Austin Metcalf would not make it. His identical twin brother Hunter was holding him in his arms when he passed away at 10:53 a.m. Quote, "I put my hand on there, I grabbed his hand and I looked in his eyes. I just saw his soul leave and it took mine too." Very sad. It all happened very quickly, and losing Austin would affect so many people, not only his immediate family, but all the other people who knew him and loved him. 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony was then arrested and charged with first-degree murder. So let me tell you a little bit more about who Carmelo Anthony is. He was obviously a high school student, a good student. He had a 4.0 GPA. Like Austin, he also played football. He was on the track team at his school. He was actually voted captain of his football team by his teammates. He grew up in a loving household with both of his parents, and I think that he has a little sister as well. Some of his hobbies were playing chess and going camping. His goal was also to become a college athlete, and he was having conversations to make that happen. Apart from being an athlete, he also worked 2 jobs, and he had never, ever been in trouble with the law at all. All of that to say that there was nothing about Carmelo Anthony, in my own personal opinion, that would suggest why he would commit murder. He had so much potential to have such a happy, great, successful life. Everything about him and his life was going in the right direction, and I wish I had a better explanation to tell you guys to at least provide some sort of possible understanding as far as a motive. But no, honestly, the more that I learned about him, the more random, for lack of a better word, that act of violence felt, at least to me. But going back to the scene of the crime, the area in the bleachers where the tents were set up and where everything happened was taped off as a crime scene, and a blue tarp was placed over it. The was also recovered because Carmelo had just thrown it up into the bleachers as he was running away. All students were then evacuated on school buses. One of the officers who responded to the scene said that when he approached Carmelo, he didn't ask him any questions at that point, but Carmelo still looked at him and said, quote, "I was protecting myself." That officer then communicated to another officer saying that he had Carmelo, the alleged suspect, and when Carmelo heard him say that, he stated, quote, "I'm not alleged, I did it." So he immediately was very forthcoming and not denying that he did what he did. And as he was being walked over to the patrol car, he became very emotional. He started crying, saying, quote, "He put his hands on me. I told him not to." And once he was sitting in the police car, he asked if Austin Metcalf was going to be okay. Carmelo Anthony was taken to Collin County Jail on a $1 million bond. His bond was then reduced to $250,000, which he paid, and he was released on bond that same day. He would be tried as an adult because under Texas criminal justice system, defendants aged 17 or older are prosecuted as adults, and then both the prosecution and the defense began prepping for trial. So this was never a case of did he do it or did he not do it, because obviously there were so many witnesses. There was also CCTV footage of it happening, even though the quality wasn't the best. There was no debating that. It was more so a case of why did he do it, because that would determine if the first-degree murder charge was changed to either manslaughter or possibly something else, which in turn would massively affect his sentence. And this case immediately became massive. It was all over the media. It started up a lot of controversial conversations, all while Austin's family was trying their best to navigate this grief, and while Carmelo's family was facing a lot of both support but also hate and rage from the public. There were people who were supporting Carmelo, but equally as many people who wanted him behind bars as soon as possible. A grand jury indicted Carmelo Anthony on charges of murder back in June of 2025, and on June 1st of 2026, his trial began with jury selection. Potential jurors filled out a questionnaire, and the jury pool included nearly 600 people. It was decided that there was going to be no cameras allowed in court, and space for the public inside of the courthouse was extremely limited. Now, jury selection in itself was a whole thing. There was a lot of back and forth, but ultimately, out of the 600 potential jurors, a jury of 12 was picked. It included 3 Asian women, 1 Middle Eastern woman, 1 woman of color, and 7 white men. So, notably, no black jurors were selected to serve. During jury selection, the prosecution struck 3 black female jurors from the pool, meaning that they did not want them to be in the jury. And I believe the prosecution's reason for striking those 3 jurors was because they were educators. But correct me if I'm wrong, or if you know anything more, like details on that, let me know. Anyway, ultimately, the judge sided with the prosecution and permitted the strikes, and we got the jury of the 12 people that I just mentioned. Now, let's get into what actually happened at trial. The trial took place at the Collin County Courthouse in McKinney, Texas. Carmelo was facing anywhere between 5 to 99 years if convicted of murder, which is a first-degree felony. However, jurors could have also found that he acted under sudden passion, which could have limited his sentence potentially down to 20 years. Reducing the charge to manslaughter was also in the conversation. So the difference between those two is that first-degree murder means that you planned and or intended to murder someone, while manslaughter means that a death happened without that intent, often in the heat of a moment or through reckless behavior. As far as sudden passion goes, that would mean that the murder happened in the heat of an intense emotional reaction like fear, anger, or terror, triggered immediately by the other person's actions rather than something planned or calculated. So that would apply if the defense argued that Austin was the person who provoked Carmelo, not the other way around. But the defense's argument was going to be claiming self-defense, which we're going to get into in a second. Jurors heard testimony over 4 days, and like I said, there were a ton of restrictions, such as no cameras inside of the courtroom. So everything that we know about this trial, we know from the people who were there and reported on it. The prosecution's argument was that this was premeditated, arguing that Carmelo Anthony had the inside of his backpack. It was a pocket one, and they argued that it was already opened, therefore saying that he knew that he was going to use it even before he pulled it out. So their belief was that he knew that he was going to use it on someone, he wanted to use it on someone, and he provoked Austin to make him mad enough to give him a reason to use it. The defense, on the other hand, was claiming self-defense from day one, and from my understanding, they did not even acknowledge why Carmelo had it on his person to begin with, which I don't know, I feel like if you're talking about premeditation, if there was a completely unrelated reason as to why Carmelo was carrying that in his backpack, it would have been beneficial probably for the defense to say, no, look, this was in his backpack because he was going camping or hunting, I don't know. Just providing an explanation that would back up their argument that he wasn't planning on doing anything. If they did believe that to be the case, which they did because they were defending him, however, they didn't talk about that at all. I don't think they gave a reason at all as to why he had it in the first place, which by the way was not illegal in the state of Texas because it's not illegal to carry that on you as long as it's smaller than 5.5 inches. Obviously very much against school policy, but not illegal. But the defense didn't talk about that at all. They just focused on the argument that he did use it as self-defense, saying the opposite that the prosecution was claiming and telling the jury that Austin provoked him and that all he was doing was protecting himself. They also argued different reasons as to why Carmelo ran away immediately after. The prosecution saying that it was because he was trying to hide because he knew what he did, he knew it was wrong, and him running away was him admitting his guilt. The defense admits that, yeah, he did run away, but because he was still in self-defense mode, his way of defending himself now was removing himself entirely out of the situation and getting as far away from it as possible. The prosecution called 21 witnesses in total, including student athletes, police officers, investigators, and other witnesses, as well as the medical examiner, who testified that Austin's injury was through the heart, describing the wound as gaping 2.5 inches in length and not survivable. The defense only called 6 witnesses, and they did not have Carmelo testify. Several teenage witnesses became emotional while they recounted the events that happened in April of 2025. Friends and teammates spoke very highly about Austin and about how much they love and miss him and about how traumatic it was witnessing what happened with their own eyes. And the courtroom, understandably so, felt very emotional. One coach testified. He was a coach from a different school, but he was at that track meet that day. And after Austin collapsed to the floor, he ran over to help while a different coach was on the phone with 911. Austin was struggling to breathe, and then he completely stopped breathing. And the coach on the phone is telling 911 that he needs help, that he can't breathe, and they tell him to start CPR. And then Austin begins making these gasping breathing sounds, and the coach who was on the phone with 911 gets a glimmer of hope because he's thinking, oh good, he's still here, he's still with us, he's fighting to breathe, but he is beginning to breathe a little bit. But the coach that testified, that was attending to Austin the day of, he was a 14-year combat veteran, meaning that he had experienced and witnessed many deaths before, and he spoke about how heartbreaking it was to hear the sounds coming from Austin and to hear the other coach thinking that it was a good sign, because this is so sad, because the sound that Austin was making is what people refer to as the death rattle. It's a gurgling, breathing sound that occurs when a person is near the end of their life. It is literally the sound of death, and it happens when the body naturally slows down and the person becomes too weak to swallow or clear saliva, causing fluids to collect in the throat and make those sounds. So that coach knew right then and there that Austin was not going to make it. Now let's talk about the self-defense argument that the defense was presenting. In Texas, self-defense is legally justified if you reasonably believe the force used is immediately necessary to protect yourself against another's unlawful force. But from my understanding, and I don't know law at all, I'm just a girl, not a lawyer, the force that has to be coming onto you has to be so strong that it literally makes you believe that the only way to stop it is by doing something else, in this case, to save your life. That would mean that Carmelo Anthony was extremely fearful and terrified for his life, that he felt like he had no option but to pull out his backpack and use it because he felt like his life was in danger. And here's where a lot of people think that the defense team messed up by not having Carmelo Anthony testify in his own defense, because their entire argument, the entire argument of his defense was based on fear, that he was scared, that he was terrified, that he acted on impulse out of that fear for his own safety, only to defend himself, not to end somebody else's life on purpose. The most compelling argument for that would come from Carmelo Anthony himself, right? Because he was a person feeling those feelings. He was the person who felt scared. He was the only person that made the decision that he did. Whether he thought it would end in death or not, he would be the only one to be able to accurately explain that he did not commit murder on purpose, because yes, he did admit that he Austin, but he didn't admit to murder. So if anyone was going to be able to argue about the thought process and the feelings of emotions that took place that ultimately led to the actions, it would be Carmelo. That would be the strongest argument that the defense would have. But they didn't put him on the stand, and instead the defense was pretty much asking this jury of 12 people to believe them when they said that Carmelo didn't mean to do what he did, he was just scared, and to please send him home and find him not guilty. But they didn't really offer any explanation for it, because the defense team, the lawyers, they were not the ones that experienced the fear themselves. Carmelo could have testified, and he could have attempted to explain to the jury why he needed to defend himself, because at that point, he had absolutely nothing else to lose. Does that make sense? I don't know, I just kind of went on a tangent. And there's so much more that we could talk about in this case, but this video is probably already way too long, so let's just get to the verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before convicting Carmelo Anthony on June 9th, 2026. He was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison and is currently being held at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice facility. If he serves his full sentence, he will be released when he is 54 years old, but he will be eligible for parole in his mid-30s. Following the sentencing, Austin's parents and his twin brother, Hunter, delivered emotional victim impact statements addressing Carmelo Anthony directly. Anthony's mother, Megan, described her son to be someone who, quote, always had a way of bringing people together. He was a peacemaker, end quote. This is another quote from her, quote, we will never know what our future could have been. For journalists, activists, this is a story. For our family, this is our reality. Our son was murdered. He didn't just die. Now my conversations with him are one-sided, sitting at his grave. I have to accept that instead of walking beside me, he's walking above me. Austin's father, Jeff, said his son's death destroyed the person that he used to be. Quote, people think grief is sadness. It is not. It is rage. This is another quote from him from when he was directly looking at Carmelo, quote, we were robbed. Don't look down. You failed your parents, you failed yourself, and you failed society. You do not belong in this community. You're going to prison. I forgave you the day it happened. I don't forgive what you did. You can't look me in the eyes, but you can see my effing son, end quote. He also stated that from day one, this was never about race. Quote, it's about right and wrong. We are all humans. We all bleed the same color. You will face those consequences starting today, end quote. And then came Hunter, Austin's twin brother. Quote, you took a son and a brother and a friend, my best friend from this world. You took someone away from me who was supposed to be an uncle to my kids. Now I want everything taken from you. You let the devil take over in that moment. Eventually your name will be forgotten, but my brother's memory will live on, end quote. Such a heavy case. It's so terrible. Obviously nothing, literally nothing ever will ever make up for that kind of loss. But I do think that the people in Austin's life do feel like justice has been served. Heartbreaking, none of the less. Yeah, that's it from me today. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Austin's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.